Welcome aboard the Bedtime Express, where every journey leads to peaceful dreams and restful sleep. I'm your conductor for tonight's magical voyage through the mists of ancient time. Tonight, we're traveling back to the very beginning of creation itself, to witness the birth of the first gods and the mighty titans who shaped our world. Our 3-hour journey will take you from the primordial void through the golden age of the Titans, ending with the great war that birthed the Olympian gods. You'll drift through 5 enchanting chapters filled with cosmic love stories, divine rebellions, and the eternal dance between order and chaos that gave birth to the universe as we know it. If you're ready to embark on this celestial adventure, please show your support by giving this video a like, sharing your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribing to Bedtime Express for more mystical bedtime journeys. Don't forget to ring that notification bell so you never miss our latest departures to dreamland. Now, make yourself comfortable in your favorite sleeping position. Close your eyes and let your breathing slow and deepen. Allow all the worries and tensions of the day to melt away as we begin our journey back to the dawn of time itself. All aboard the Bedtime Express. Next stop, the birth of the cosmos. The Titans and the birth of the gods. Close your eyes now and let your mind drift back to the very beginning of time itself. Before there were stars twinkling in the velvet darkness, before there were mountains reaching toward heaven, before there was even light or shadow, there was only chaos. Imagine, if you will, a vast emptiness that stretches beyond all comprehension. Not the darkness of night, for night implies the existence of day. Not the silence of a quiet room, for silence suggests that sound once existed. This was something far more profound, a void so complete that even the concept of existence had not yet been born. In this primordial nothingness, the first stirrings of creation began to whisper. Like the gentlest breath upon still water, consciousness emerged from the void. And from this consciousness came the first divine being, Gaia, the Earth Mother, whose very essence would become the foundation of all life. Gaia was not born as you or I might understand birth. She simply began to exist, her presence filling the emptiness like morning light, gradually illuminating a dark room. Her form was vast beyond measure, her spirit encompassing all that would become the solid ground beneath our feet, the fertile soil that would nurture countless generations of living things. As Gaia awakened to her own existence, she felt a deep loneliness that echoed through the cosmos. And so, from her own divine essence, she brought forth Uranus, the Sky Father. Uranus rose above her like a great dome of midnight blue, studded with the promise of stars yet to be born. He was her complement, her eternal partner in the dance of creation that was just beginning. Together, Gaia and Uranus gazed upon the emptiness that surrounded them, and they knew that their love would fill this void with wonders beyond imagination. Their union was not merely romantic, it was cosmic, fundamental, the very force that would drive all creation forward through the ages to come. From the depths of the earth came Tartarus, the deepest realm of all existence. If Gaia was the nurturing mother and Uranus the protective father, then Tartarus was the mysterious uncle who dwelt in the shadows. His domain lay far beneath the surface world, a place of profound depths where the most ancient powers would one day be imprisoned. He was not evil, but he was necessary, for even in the realm of the divine, there must be places where the uncontrollable forces of creation could be contained. And there was Eros, born from the cosmic forces of attraction that drew all things together. Not the playful cherub of later stories, but a primordial force of love and desire that would ensure the continuation of all life. Eros moved through the emerging cosmos like a warm breeze, touching everything with the spark of connection, the yearning to create, to unite, to become more than the sum of individual parts. Night descended from chaos in the form of Nyx, a goddess of such ancient power that even Zeus himself would one day fear to cross her. She wrapped herself in a cloak woven from the darkness between stars, her presence both comforting and terrible. With her came her brother, consort Erebus, the personification of deep shadow, and together they brought forth the rhythm of darkness and light that would govern all time. From Nyx and Erebus came day, bright Hemera, who would chase her mother across the sky in an eternal cycle. And with day came Ether, the pure upper air where the gods themselves would one day dwell, breathing the crystalline atmosphere that mortals could only dream of touching. Picture now this primordial family, these first divine beings taking their places in the cosmic order. Gaia spreads herself wide and welcoming, her body becoming continents and islands, valleys and plains. Uranus arches above her, his star-scattered form providing the canopy under which all life will unfold. The cycles of night and day begin their eternal dance, while in the deepest places, Tartarus waits with infinite patience. But this was only the very beginning of the story. For Gaia and Uranus, in their cosmic love, would soon bring forth children whose power and ambition would reshape the very foundations of reality. These would be the Titans, beings of such magnificent strength and terrible beauty that their very names would echo through eternity. As the first age of creation drew to a close, the stage was set for a drama of mythic proportions. The primordial forces had established the basic structure of existence: earth and sky, light and darkness, love and the deep places where ancient powers slumber. But the universe was still young, still malleable, waiting for the mighty hands of the Titans to shape it into something grander, more complex, more wondrous than anything that had come before. Rest now and let your mind drift with the cosmic winds of this ancient time. Feel yourself floating in the gentle darkness between night and day, between earth and sky, in the peaceful moments before the great drama of creation reaches its full crescendo. For tomorrow, or perhaps in just a few moments of this eternal now, the Titans will be born, and the universe will never be the same. In the soft twilight between sleeping and waking, let your imagination carry you forward through the mists of time, drifting like a leaf on the cosmic winds that blow between the realms of dream and reality. The primordial cosmos has found its rhythm now, the eternal dance of day and night, painting the sky in ever-changing hues, the solid foundation of earth beneath the star-swept dome of sky, the deep places where ancient mysteries sleep in patient darkness. And in this cosmic harmony, as perfect and peaceful as a song sung by the spheres themselves, Gaia and Uranus prepare to bring forth their children, but they do not yet know that these children will transform not just the cosmos, but the very nature of divine parenthood itself. The first birth was unlike anything the universe had ever witnessed, for indeed, nothing like birth had ever occurred before. The primordial beings had simply emerged from chaos, coalescing from pure possibility into distinct existence. But this was different. This was creation through union, the combining of two separate divine essences to produce something that was both like and unlike its parents. From the union of earth and sky came not one child, but 12, the mighty Titans, each one embodying a fundamental force of nature, each one destined to play a crucial role in shaping the cosmos into its mature form. They emerged from their mother's womb already giants, already possessed of divine power that would make mountains tremble and oceans shift their borders. Yet they were also, in their first moments of existence, as vulnerable and wondering as any newborns, blinking in the cosmic light with eyes that had never seen color before, breathing the divine atmosphere with lungs that had never tasted air. Their first cries shook the foundations of heaven and earth, not with rage or discomfort, but with the sheer exuberance of beings discovering their own existence, their own magnificent potential. Oceanus was the first to emerge, born with the sound of rushing water, singing in his voice like a river, finding its course for the first time. He uncoiled from his mother's embrace with movements that were both serpentine and fluid, his body already beginning to take on the characteristics that would define his eternal nature. His beard flowed like sea foam caught in a permanent breeze, each strand glistening with droplets that reflected light that had never been reflected before. His eyes reflected the deep blue of infinite waters, but more than that, they held the wisdom of currents and tides, of the eternal circulation that would carry life-giving moisture to every corner of creation. As Oceanus stretched his newly formed limbs, something miraculous began to happen. Where he moved, springs bubbled up from the earth like laughter made liquid, and the first rains began to fall from his father's sky, as if Uranus himself was weeping tears of joy at the sight of his firstborn son. These were not the rains that later mortals would know, driven by weather patterns and atmospheric pressure. These were divine rains, each drop containing the essence of possibility, the potential for life that had been waiting in the cosmic void since the beginning of time. Beside Oceanus came Tethys, his eternal bride, though neither of them yet understood what marriage or partnership meant. These concepts were being invented in the very moment of their creation. She was the goddess of the fertile waters that would nourish all life, but she was also something more subtle and profound. She was nurturing itself made manifest, the cosmic principle that ensures life not only comes into being, but is sustained and encouraged to flourish. Her touch brought life to barren lands before there were any lands to be barren. Her laughter became the sound of brooks babbling over smooth stones that had not yet been worn smooth by centuries of water song. Together, Oceanus and Tethys would father the 3,000 river gods and the 3,000 ocean nymphs, creating a vast family of water spirits to tend every drop of moisture in the world. But this astounding fertility was still in the future. For now, they were simply two divine children discovering each other, their hands touching for the first time, sending ripples of creative energy through the cosmos that would eventually become the network of waterways that would give life to countless worlds. Hyperion emerged next, blazing with light that had never before been seen in the cosmos. Light that was qualitatively different from the gentle radiance that had emanated from the primordial beings. This was not the soft glow of potential or the steady illumination of established order, but something fierce and active, light that seemed to have its own agenda, its own desire to reach into every corner of existence and reveal what had been hidden there. He was the Titan of heavenly light, the father of illumination itself, but more than that, he was the principle of revelation, the divine force that would ensure nothing could remain secret forever. His very presence began to burn away the primordial darkness, not harshly like a fire-consuming tinder, but with a gentle radiance that promised warmth and growth, and the kind of understanding that comes only when things are seen clearly for what they truly are. Where his light touched the earth, it seemed to awaken something that had been sleeping there, a responsiveness that would later become the ability of plants to turn toward the sun, of flowers to open their petals to receive illumination. His wife would be Theia, the goddess of sight and the shining light of the clear blue sky, though she had not yet been born when Hyperion first opened his blazing eyes. She was still waiting in the cosmic pattern of possibilities, her own birth timed to coincide with the moment when light would need someone to witness it, to appreciate it, to reflect it back in new and beautiful ways. From their future union would come Helios the sun, Selene the moon, and Eos the dawn, the three great lights that would govern the rhythm of mortal life for all time to come, but who were still just dreams in the minds of their not yet existent parents. Caius rose like a pillar of wisdom and inquiry, his mind already reaching toward the distant stars with a curiosity so intense it seemed to bend space itself around him. He was intelligence incarnate, but not the cold, calculating intelligence that seeks only to catalogue and control. Rather, he was the warm intelligence of wonder, the divine curiosity that asks questions not because it needs answers, but because the asking itself is a form of love, a way of embracing the mystery of existence. He was the titan of the axis around which the heavens turn, but he was also the cosmic principle of inquiry, the force that would ensure the universe would never become static or predictable. His thoughts moved like constellations across the night sky, forming patterns of knowledge that had never been conceived before, connecting ideas that had never existed to be connected. When he concentrated, the very fabric of space seemed to organize itself around his mental processes, creating geometric relationships between the stars that would one day serve as navigation aids for mortals brave enough to venture into unknown waters. With his sister bride Phoebe, goddess of prophetic wisdom and the silver light of the moon, he would father Leto and Asteria, goddesses whose own children would one day rival the greatest of the gods. But Phoebe too was still gestating in the cosmic womb of possibility, her silver radiance waiting for the proper moment to illuminate the darker corners of divine wisdom. Crea stepped forth as the master of the celestial constellations, his body already beginning to map itself with the patterns of stars yet to be born. He was the titan of astronomy and navigation, but he was also something more fundamental. He was the principle of guidance, the cosmic force that would ensure no traveler would ever be completely lost. No seeker would ever be entirely without direction. His voice carried the music of the spheres, that perfect harmony created by the movement of celestial bodies through the cosmic dance, a music so beautiful that it would later drive mortal composers to tears of frustration when they tried to capture even a fragment of it in their earthly instruments. As Cronus stretched his divine limbs, points of light began to appear in the darkness above, not yet the full constellations that would guide future heroes on their quests, but the beginning sketches, the rough drafts of the stellar patterns that would organize the night sky into a readable map of divine intentions. Each point of light was both a star in its own right and a note in the cosmic symphony that Cronus was composing, a song so vast and complex that it would take the entire history of the universe to perform in its entirety. Divine power that would make mountains tremble and oceans shift their borders. Oceanus was the first, born with the sound of rushing water singing in his voice. He uncoiled from his mother's embrace like a great river finding its course, his body becoming the vast stream that would encircle the entire world. His beard flowed like sea foam, his eyes reflected the deep blue of infinite waters. Where he moved, springs bubbled up from the earth, and the first rains began to fall from his father's sky. Beside him came Tethys, his eternal bride, the goddess of the fertile waters that would nourish all life. She was the mother of rivers, the keeper of the sweet springs, the one who would ensure that every stream would find its way to the sea. Her touch brought life to barren lands. Her laughter became the sound of brooks babbling over smooth stones. Together, Oceanus and Tethys would father the 3,000 river gods and the 3,000 ocean nymphs, creating a vast family of water spirits to tend every drop of moisture in the world. Hyperion emerged blazing with light that had never before been seen in the cosmos. He was the Titan of heavenly light, the father of illumination itself. His very presence began to burn away the primordial darkness, not harshly, but with a gentle radiance that promised warmth and growth. His wife would be Thea, the goddess of sight and the shining light of the clear blue sky. From their union would come Helios the sun, Selene the moon, and Eos the dawn, the three great lights that would govern the rhythm of mortal life for all time to come. Chaos rose like a pillar of wisdom and inquiry, his mind already reaching toward the distant stars. He was intelligence incarnate, the Titan of the axis around which the heavens turn. His thoughts moved like constellations across the night sky, forming patterns of knowledge that had never been conceived before. With his sister bride Phoebe, goddess of prophetic wisdom and the silver light of the moon, he would father Leto and Asteria, goddesses whose own children would one day rival the greatest of the gods. Creus stepped forth as the master of the celestial constellations, his body mapped with the patterns of stars yet to be born. He was the Titan of astronomy and navigation, the one who would teach mortals to read the messages written in the wheeling heavens. His voice carried the music of the spheres, that perfect harmony created by the movement of celestial bodies through the cosmic dance. And then came Iapetus, whose name would be remembered with both reverence and tragedy. He was the Titan of mortality and human life, though humans themselves were still just a dream in the mind of creation. There was something different about Iapetus, a quality of thoughtfulness and innovation that set him apart from his more elemental siblings. He would become the father of Prometheus, the fire-bringer, who would one day steal divine flame to give to humanity, but also of Atlas, who would bear the weight of the sky upon his shoulders as punishment for rebellion. In Iapetus, the seeds of both heroism and hubris were planted. Cronus was born last among the male Titans, and from his first breath there was something about him that made even his mighty parents pause. He was beautiful beyond description, with golden hair that caught light like wheat fields in summer, but in his eyes burned an ambition so fierce that it seemed to bend the very air around him. He was the Titan of time and harvest, of the scythe that cuts down the grain when it is ready. Even as a child, Cronus seemed to understand that all things must change, that even the greatest powers must eventually yield to those who come after. Among the female Titans, Theia shone with the pure light that makes all things visible. She was divine radiance itself, the gleam of gold and silver, the sparkle of jewels, the glow that emanates from all precious things. Her beauty was not just physical but spiritual. She was the light by which truth could be perceived, wisdom could be gained, and the hidden nature of all things could be revealed. Rhea emerged as the great mother goddess, the one who would ensure the continuation of divine life through all the ages to come. She was fertility and nurturing incarnate, the protective mother who would shield her children even from their own father's wrath. Her presence brought a sense of safety and continuity to the cosmic order. She was the reliable constant, the one who could be trusted to preserve what was precious and to nurture what was vulnerable. Themis rose as the embodiment of divine law and proper ordering. She was justice before justice had a name, custom before tradition had been established, the right way of doing things that exists in the very fabric of reality itself. When she spoke, her words carried the weight of cosmic truth. When she moved in perfect harmony with the natural order of all things. Kings would one day seek her counsel, and even the greatest gods would defer to her wisdom in matters of propriety and law. Mnemosyne came forth as the keeper of memory, the one who would ensure that nothing important would ever be truly lost. She was the cosmic library, the divine chronicler who recorded every deed, every word, every moment of significance in the great story of creation. Her mind was vast as the universe itself, capable of holding not just what had been, but what was, and even what might yet come to pass. From her union with Zeus would eventually come the 9 Muses, those goddesses who would inspire mortals to create art and literature and music that would preserve the greatest truths for future generations. Finally came Phoebe, radiant with the silver light of divine intuition and prophecy. She was the Titan of the oracular power, the one who could peer through the veils of time and see what was hidden from ordinary sight. Her wisdom was not the rational knowledge of Coeus, but the deeper understanding that comes from connection to the mystical forces that guide the universe. She was the grandmother of Apollo and Artemis, and through them, her gift of prophecy would become one of the most treasured powers among the later gods. These 12 Titans looked upon the world their parents had created and saw infinite possibilities. They were not content to simply exist. They wanted to build, to shape, to impose their will upon reality and make it something grander than it had ever been before. Each one claimed dominion over their particular sphere of influence, and together they began to organize the cosmos into a more complex and sophisticated system than had ever existed. But the Titans were not the only children born to Gaia and Uranus. The Earth Mother's womb proved wonderfully fertile, and she brought forth other offspring as well, the three mighty Cyclopes, each with a single enormous eye in the center of his forehead. Brontes brought thunder, Steripes brought lightning, and Arges brought the bright flash that accompanies the celestial fire. These giant craftsmen would one day forge the weapons of the gods themselves: Zeus's thunderbolts, Poseidon's trident, and Hades' helmet of invisibility. And there were the three Hecatoncheires, the 100-handed giants whose strength was beyond measure. Cottus, Briareus, and Gyges each possessed 50 heads and 100 arms, making them forces of nature more than individual beings. When they moved, the earth shook. When they spoke, their voices rumbled like earthquakes. They were chaos and order combined, destruction and protection unified in forms so mighty that even the Titans regarded them with awe. Uranus looked upon all these children, the elegant Titans, the powerful Cyclopes, the overwhelming Hecatoncheires, and felt a growing unease in his celestial heart. They were magnificent, certainly. They were powerful beyond his initial imaginings, but they were also independent, ambitious, and clearly destined to become forces that might one day challenge even his own supremacy. And so, in an act that would echo through the ages as one of the first great injustices, Uranus made a terrible decision. He could not bear the thought that these children might one day surpass him, and so, as soon as each child was born, he seized them and thrust them back into Gaia's womb, imprisoning them in the depths of the earth where they could never challenge his rule. Imagine Gaia's anguish as her beloved children were torn from her arms and forced back into the darkness of her depths. Feel her pain as their struggles and cries echoed through her body like the worst kind of earthquake. The Earth Mother, who had brought forth these wonders with such love and hope, now became their unwilling prison, her own body turned into a cage by her husband's jealousy and fear. The cosmos itself seemed to groan under the weight of this injustice. The natural order had been violated, the proper relationship between parent and child corrupted by paranoia and the desperate desire to cling to power. But even as Uranus congratulated himself on his cleverness, the seeds of his own downfall were already being planted. For Gaia, in her pain and rage, began to plan her revenge, and she would find in one of her imprisoned sons the beautiful, ambitious Cronus, a willing instrument of that vengeance. The age of the Titans was about to begin, but it would be born not in joy and celebration, but in blood and revolution. Sleep now, and dream of the great powers stirring in the depths of the earth. Feel the potential energy building like pressure in a volcano, waiting for the moment when it will burst forth and reshape the world. For the next chapter of our story will bring the first great war in the history of creation, and nothing will ever be the same again. Let your mind drift deeper now into the darkness where the imprisoned titans waited in the depths of their mother's body. Years passed in the upper world, perhaps centuries, for time moved differently in that elder age when the cosmos was still young and malleable. Above, Uranus continued his reign over the star-scattered sky, believing himself secure in his power. But below, in the secret places of the earth, revolution was brewing. Gaia's pain had only grown with the passing years. To feel her children trapped within her, struggling and suffering, was an agony beyond all description. She was the nurturing mother of all life, yet she had been forced to become their prison. Her love for them burned like molten rock in her deepest places, and from that love came a determination that would shake the very foundations of the world. In the hidden forges of her heart, Gaia began to create something that had never existed before. Using the grey flint of her bones and the adamantine strength of her will, she crafted a great scythe, a weapon so sharp it could cut through anything, so mighty it could wound even the immortal flesh of the gods themselves. This was no ordinary tool of harvest, but an instrument of cosmic justice forged from a mother's love and a mother's rage. When the scythe was complete, Gaia called to her imprisoned children, her voice carrying through stone and earth to reach them in their darkness. "My beloved sons," she said, and her words were like the rumbling of distant thunder. "How long will you endure this injustice? 5. Your father has wronged us all, and the time has come for vengeance. Who among you has the courage to free yourselves and your brothers? Who will take up arms against the tyrant of the sky?" The Titans heard their mother's call, and their hearts burned with the desire for freedom and revenge. But they also knew the magnitude of what she was asking. To strike against their father would be to commit an act unprecedented in the history of the cosmos. No child had ever raised a hand against a parent in violence. Such a deed would establish a pattern that might echo through all future generations. Most of the Titans hesitated, torn between their desire for freedom and their natural reverence for the father who had given them life. But not Cronus, the youngest of the male Titans, he who was destined to rule over time itself, understood that all things must change. He had inherited his father's ambition, but also a clearer vision of the cosmic order that was meant to be. "Mother," Cronus spoke from the darkness, and his voice carried a terrible beauty, like the song of wind through golden grain ready for harvest. "I will take up your scythe. I will end our father's tyranny. Give me the weapon, and I will free us all." Gaia's heart swelled with both pride and sorrow as she placed the great scythe in her youngest son's hands. She knew that she was setting in motion events that would transform the universe forever. The age of primordial simplicity was ending, to be replaced by an age of complexity, struggle, and constant change. But her children's freedom was worth any price. The plan they devised was both elegant and terrible in its simplicity. Each evening, Uranus would descend from the heights of the sky to embrace his beloved Gaia, covering her with the star-scattered darkness of his form. It was during these moments of cosmic union that he was most vulnerable, most distracted by love and desire. And it would be during one of these embraces that Cronus would strike. The night chosen for the deed was one of perfect darkness, when even the faintest stars seemed to hold their breath in anticipation. Uranus came to his bride as he had countless times before, spreading his celestial form across her terrestrial beauty, lost in the rapture of their eternal love. He did not see the hand that emerged from the depths of the earth, did not notice the gleam of the fatal scythe until it was far too late. Cronus struck with all the pent-up fury of years of imprisonment, all the strength that had been building in his divine muscles during the long wait for freedom. The scythe cut through his father's immortal flesh as easily as a farmer's blade cuts through stalks of wheat. Uranus's cry of agony and betrayal echoed across the cosmos, a sound so terrible that even the primordial forces of chaos stirred in their ancient slumber. But the consequences of this cosmic violence were far greater than anyone had anticipated. As the severed portions of Uranus fell through the air, his divine blood scattered across land and sea, and from each drop, new forms of life began to spring. Where his blood touched the earth, there arose the Erinyes, the Furies, goddesses of vengeance, who would pursue those who committed crimes against family and the natural order. They were born from the very act of patricide that had freed the Titans, destined to ensure that such violations of the cosmic law would never go unpunished. From the same divine blood came the Meliae, the ash tree nymphs who would one day provide the wood from which mortal spears would be made. And strangest of all, the giants sprang from the earth where Uranus's blood had fallen, massive beings of incredible strength who would one day wage their own war against the gods, continuing the cycle of violence that had begun with Cronus's rebellion. But the most beautiful consequence of this cosmic tragedy occurred when the severed portions of Uranus fell into the sea. The ocean foam that rose around them began to take shape, forming itself into the figure of a goddess of such stunning beauty that even the sea waves themselves seemed to pause in admiration. This was Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty, born from the union of violence and the sea, embodying the paradox that the most beautiful things often arise from the most painful circumstances. She rose from the waves fully grown, her golden hair streaming with sea spray, her eyes reflecting the infinite depths of both the ocean and the heart's deepest desires. As the immediate shock of the deed began to fade, the liberated Titans emerged from their earthly prison into a world that had been forever changed. They blinked in the starlight, breathed the free air, and stretched muscles that had been cramped for far too long. The cosmos itself seemed different now, more dangerous perhaps, but also more alive with possibility. Cronus stood among his siblings, the bloodied scythe still in his hands, and felt the weight of leadership settling upon his broad shoulders. His brothers and sisters looked to him with a mixture of gratitude, admiration, and something that might have been fear. He had proven himself capable of the ultimate act of rebellion. What else might he be capable of? But there was no time for such philosophical considerations. The immediate task was to establish a new order to replace the one they had shattered. The universe could not exist in chaos indefinitely. Someone had to take responsibility for maintaining the cosmic functions that Uranus had overseen. Someone had to become the new ruler of creation. By unanimous consent of his siblings, Cronus was declared the new king of the cosmos. He had earned the right through his courage and decisive action. But more than that, he seemed to possess the vision necessary to guide creation into its next phase of development. His understanding of time and cycles, his appreciation for the necessity of change, made him seem like the natural choice to oversee the continuing evolution of the universe. The first act of Cronus's reign was to free his other siblings, the mighty Cyclopes and the 100-handed Hecatoncheires, from their earthly prison. But here, the new king made his first crucial error, perhaps fearing their enormous power, perhaps simply not knowing what to do with beings so chaotic and uncontrollable. Cronus chose to imprison them again, not in the depths of the earth, but in the shadowy realm of Tartarus, where they would be even more securely contained. This decision would prove to be a fateful one, for it established a pattern that would define Cronus's reign. Though he had rebelled against his father's tyranny, he was not immune to the same fears and insecurities that had driven Uranus to imprison his children. The scythe that had freed the Titans had also planted the seeds of paranoia in their liberator's heart. But for now, those consequences lay hidden in the future. For now, it was the golden age of the Titans, a time when these mighty beings would shape the world according to their grand visions and establish the foundations upon which all future civilizations would be built. The cosmos had been reborn through violence, yes, but it had also been set free to become something greater than it had ever been before. Cronus took his place upon the throne of creation, and beside him stood his queen, the beautiful Rhea, whose nurturing presence promised that this new age would be one of growth and prosperity. Together, they looked out upon a universe that was theirs to shape, there to rule, theirs to pass on to whatever children might be born to them. The age of the Titans had begun, and it would be remembered as a time of wonders. But even in this moment of triumph, the echoes of the original violence continued to resonate through the cosmos. For the child who strikes down his father may one day find his own children raising weapons against him, and in the deepest places of creation, new powers were already stirring, powers that would one day challenge even the mighty titans for dominion over the world. Rest now and let your dreams carry you into that golden age when gods walked like giants across the earth, when every mountain was their throne and every ocean their pathway. Feel the weight of cosmic responsibility, the burden and the glory of shaping reality according to divine will. For soon a new generation will be born, and the eternal cycle of challenge and change will begin once again. Drift now into dreams of a time when the world was young and malleable, when the very air shimmered with divine power and every sunrise brought new wonders into being. The reign of Cronus had begun, and with it came an age that would be remembered through all the generations that followed as a time of perfect harmony and abundance. Under the wise guidance of the Titan King, the cosmos began to organize itself into patterns of beauty and efficiency that surpassed even the most optimistic dreams of creation. Cronus himself took dominion over time, learning to weave the moments and hours into rhythms that supported life and growth. Where once time had flowed wild and unpredictable, now it moved in measured cadences that allowed for the proper succession of seasons, the orderly progression from seed to harvest, from youth to maturity. Each of the Titans claimed their own sphere of influence and began to shape it according to their divine vision. Oceanus expanded his realm until his flowing form encircled the entire world, becoming the great river ocean that would serve as the highway for gods and the boundary between the known and unknown. His countless children, the river gods and ocean nymphs, spread throughout the world to tend every stream and spring, ensuring that the life-giving waters would reach even the most remote corners of creation. Hyperion took his place as the Lord of heavenly light, and from his union with Theia came 3 children who would transform the very nature of existence. First was Helios, the magnificent sun god, whose golden chariot would carry the light of day across the sky from east to west. His horses breathed flame and starfire, their hooves striking sparks from the crystalline paths of heaven. When Helios rose each morning, the world awakened in wonder at the beauty of his radiance. Selene, the moon goddess, became the gentle queen of night, her silver chariot drawn by horses whose coats were the pale white of moonbeams on still water. She brought dreams to mortals and gods alike, her soft light inspiring poetry and prophecy, love and contemplation. Under her benevolent gaze, the night became not a time of fear and darkness, but of peace and mystical revelation. And there was Eos, the rosy-fingered dawn, whose appearance each morning filled the sky with colors that had no names, not just pink and gold, but hues that existed only in the realm of the divine, shades that mortal eyes could perceive, but mortal languages could never adequately describe. She was the herald of each new day, the promise that no matter how dark the night had been, light and hope would always return. The other Titans established their own domains with equal magnificence. Chaos became the master of the world's axis, around which all the heavens would turn, while his bride Phoebe claimed dominion over the oracular powers that would one day guide heroes and kings. Cronus mapped the constellations across the night sky, creating patterns of stars that would serve as celestial guidebooks for generations of travelers and astronomers. Iapetus, with his gift for innovation and his deep concern for the mortals who had not yet been created, began to experiment with new forms of life and consciousness. His children would include Prometheus, the far-seeing one who would one day steal fire from the gods to give to humanity, and Atlas, whose strength would prove so mighty that he would be chosen to hold up the very sky, but also Epimetheus, whose name meant afterthought, and who would serve as a reminder that even divine wisdom could sometimes arrive too late to prevent tragedy. Themis established the great laws that would govern not just mortal behavior, but the conduct of the gods themselves. Her pronouncements carried the weight of cosmic necessity. They were not arbitrary rules imposed by force, but expressions of the fundamental order that underlies all reality. When she spoke of justice, mountains bowed their heads in acknowledgement. When she declared what was right and proper, even the winds changed course to align themselves with her will. Mnemosyne became the living memory of the cosmos, preserving not just the events that had transpired, but the deeper meanings behind them. In her vast mind, she held the complete story of creation, from its first stirring in the primordial void to the present moment. More than that, she could see the patterns that connected all things, the ways in which every action rippled forward through time to influence events that had not yet come to pass. Poets and prophets would one day seek her blessing, knowing that true inspiration came not just from creativity, but from connection to the eternal truths she safeguarded. During this golden age, the world itself began to take on the forms that would be familiar to later generations. Mountains rose at the Titan's command, their peaks touching the lower reaches of heaven. Forests spread across the continents, filled with trees whose wood possessed magical properties and whose fruits could grant visions of the future. The seas teemed with creatures both beautiful and strange, some that would survive into the mortal age, and others that existed only in this time when magic flowed as freely as water. But perhaps the greatest achievement of this age was the creation of the first mortals. These were not the humans who would later populate the earth, but an earlier race, the Golden People, fashioned by the Titans themselves as an experiment in conscious life. They were made not from clay or dust, but from the very essence of divine light, given form and independence, yet remaining connected to their creators through bonds of love and mutual respect. The golden people lived lives of perfect contentment under the benevolent rule of Cronus. They knew neither want nor conflict, for the earth provided everything they needed without labor. They aged so slowly that a single lifetime might span thousands of years, and when death finally came to them, it was as gentle as falling asleep after a day of perfect happiness. They had no need for laws or rulers among themselves, for they were incapable of cruelty or injustice. Their hearts were filled with the same divine harmony that governed the movements of the stars. But even in this paradise, there were hints that perfection might not be sustainable. Cronus, despite his wisdom and good intentions, had begun to display some of the same traits that had made his father into a tyrant. The Cyclopes and Hecatoncheires remained imprisoned in Tartarus, their immense power locked away not because they had done anything wrong, but because Cronus feared what they might do if they were free. More troubling still, Cronus had begun to hear disturbing rumors, whispers carried on the wind, fragments of prophecy that spoke of his eventual downfall. The source of these warnings was Gaia herself, the Earth Mother who had once been his ally in the overthrow of Uranus. But Gaia's loyalty was not to any individual ruler, no matter how beloved. Her loyalty was to the cosmic order itself, to the great pattern of change and growth that drove all creation forward. The prophecy was simple in its words but devastating in its implications, spoken in the voice of the earth itself, with the weight of geological ages behind every syllable. As you overthrew your father, so shall one of your children overthrow you. The cycle of succession will continue, and each generation must yield to the next, for this is the law of time itself, which even you, Lord Cronus, cannot escape or alter, no matter how great your wisdom or how mighty your power. At first, Cronus dismissed these warnings as the fears of an overly cautious earth goddess, the neurotic anxieties of a being who had lived through too much change and now saw threats everywhere she looked. He was not his father, after all. He had learned from Uranus's mistakes, understood the importance of treating one's children with love and respect rather than fear and suspicion. He had no intention of oppressing his children or giving them cause for rebellion. He would be a wise and loving father, the kind of parent he himself had never had, and surely his children would have no reason to turn against him, no motivation to repeat the cycle of violence that had brought him to power. But as time passed, as the Golden Age continued its seemingly perfect course, the prophecy began to weigh more heavily on his mind, like a stone growing larger in his chest with each passing day. He found himself watching his wife Rhea with a mixture of love and growing anxiety, torn between his desire to start a family and his terror of what that family might ultimately bring. She was the perfect queen, the ideal partner for a cosmic ruler, her nurturing presence a source of stability and comfort in his increasingly troubled thoughts. But she was also the future mother of his children, and according to the prophecy, one of those children was destined to destroy him just as he had destroyed his own father. The paradise of the Golden Age began to feel less secure as Cronus brooded on his fate during the long nights when even the gods were supposed to rest. The perfection that surrounded him, the contented golden people, the harmony of the natural world, the loyalty of his fellow titans, all of it began to seem fragile, temporary, built on foundations that could crumble at the first sign of serious challenge. How could he protect himself without becoming the very thing he had rebelled against? How could he ensure his own survival without betraying everything he claimed to stand for? 5. How could he break the cycle of patricide without himself becoming the kind of tyrant who deserved to be overthrown? The questions tormented him through long nights when sleep refused to come, when even the gentle light of Selene seemed to mock him with its serene indifference to his troubles. He paced the halls of his palace like a caged animal, his mind turning over the same possibilities again and again, searching for some solution that would allow him to remain both a good king and a living one. Sometimes he considered abdicating, passing power to one of his siblings, and retiring to some distant realm where prophecies could not reach him. But he knew that such a solution would be both cowardly and futile. The patterns of destiny were not so easily escaped, and besides, his sense of responsibility to the cosmos would not allow him to abandon his post simply to save his own life. Rhea, sensing her husband's growing distress even when he tried to hide it from her, tried to reassure him with gentle words and loving embraces that grew more desperate as his anxiety increased. "The future is not fixed, my lord," she would whisper as they lay together beneath the star-scattered sky, her voice carrying the warmth and certainty that had first made him fall in love with her. Prophecies speak of possibilities, not certainties, of what might happen if current patterns continue unchanged. Perhaps our love will prove stronger than fate itself. Perhaps the very act of knowing about this prophecy will allow us to change it, to find a different path that leads to a different ending. For a while, her words seemed to comfort him, and the Golden Age continued its peaceful course like a river flowing smoothly between familiar banks. The seasons turned in their proper order, each one bringing its own gifts and beauties. The harvests were abundant, the weather was perfect, and the golden people lived their blessed lives in perfect harmony with the natural world and their divine overseers. The younger Titans continued to establish their own realms and relationships. Prometheus walked among the mortals, learning their ways and growing to love them with a compassion that would one day lead him to risk everything for their sake. Atlas practiced lifting mountains, preparing for some great task that seemed to call to him from the future, though he did not yet understand what that task would be. The cosmos seemed to be fulfilling all the promises that had been made when the Titans first overthrew their father. It was growing more complex, more beautiful, more filled with conscious beings capable of appreciating the wonders that surrounded them. Art and music flourished under the patronage of the Titans, who understood that beauty was not merely decoration, but a fundamental force of creation, as necessary to the cosmic order as gravity or electromagnetic force. Philosophy began to develop as conscious beings started to ask deeper questions about the nature of existence, the meaning of their lives, and their relationship to the divine forces that had created them. But in the deepest chambers of Cronus's mind, in the places where even Rhea's love could not reach, the prophecy echoed like a wound that would not heal, like a discordant note in the otherwise perfect music of the Golden Age. And when Rhea finally came to him with the news that she was with child, their first child, the beginning of the next generation, the fulfillment of all their hopes, and the possible instrument of all their fears, his joy was immediately overshadowed by terror so profound that it seemed to dim the very light of Helios in the sky above. The child growing in Rhea's womb represented everything Cronus had ever wanted: a family to love, a legacy to leave behind, a continuation of the Golden Age into the future through beings who carried both his divine essence and Rhea's nurturing spirit. But it also represented the instrument of his destruction, the weapon that fate would use to cut him down, just as he had cut down his father with the scythe that now hung in his palace, as both a symbol of his power and a reminder of his crime. Every kick from the unborn child felt like a rehearsal for the blow that would one day fell him. Every movement in Rhea's belly a reminder that his own ending was literally growing larger with each passing day. As the months of Rhea's pregnancy progressed, Cronus found himself torn between anticipation and dread, between the natural excitement of a father-to-be and the cosmic terror of a king who knew his own fate. He wanted to love this child, to be the father he had never had, to break the cycle of fear and violence that had characterized his relationship with his own parent. But he also wanted to survive, to continue ruling the cosmos that he had shaped with such care and wisdom, to preserve the Golden Age that had brought such happiness to so many conscious beings. The Golden People noticed the change in their beloved king, though they could not understand its cause or significance. Where once he had moved through the world with confident grace, radiating the kind of calm authority that made everyone around him feel safe and protected, now he seemed burdened by invisible weights, carrying responsibilities that grew heavier with each passing day. Where once his laughter had rung across the mountains like music, celebrating the pure joy of existence in a perfectly ordered cosmos, now he spoke in measured tones that carried undertones of sorrow, as if he was already mourning something that had not yet been lost. The very air of the Golden Age began to shimmer with tension, as if the perfect harmony of the cosmos was starting to develop tiny, almost imperceptible cracks, like the first signs of stress in a crystal that has been subjected to too much pressure. The seasons still turned in their proper order, but their transitions seemed slightly less smooth, as if the cosmic machinery that governed them was beginning to show signs of wear. The weather remained perfect, but there were subtle changes: clouds that lingered a little too long, winds that shifted direction without apparent cause, rains that fell when they were least expected and failed to come when they were most needed. And in the depths of Tartarus, where the Cyclopes and Hecatoncheires waited in their ancient bondage, something began to stir, not rebellion exactly, for they were too securely imprisoned for that, but a kind of psychic restlessness that seemed to respond to the growing instability in the cosmic order above. They could sense the change in their captor, could feel the growing cracks in his confidence and authority. They had been locked away for opposing tyranny once before, when Uranus had first imprisoned them in the depths of the earth. Perhaps the time was coming when they would be called upon to do so again, when their terrible strength would once more be needed to correct the balance of power in the divine realm. The night when Rhea went into labor was the darkest night the Golden Age had ever known, though not because the stars had failed to shine or Selene had forgotten her path across the sky. It was dark because the heart of the cosmic king was filled with shadows that seemed to dim all light, because the joy that should have accompanied the birth of his first child was overshadowed by the terror of what that child might represent. Cronus paced the halls of his palace like a caged lion, his hands clenching and unclenching around the handle of the scythe that had won him his throne, the weapon that had freed him from his father's tyranny and that might now be needed to protect him from his own child's potential treachery. When the child was finally born, a daughter, beautiful and perfect, with eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of the earth itself, and a cry that rang with the clear note of innocence itself, Cronus felt his heart break and mend and break again in the space of a single heartbeat. This was his daughter, his precious child, the most wonderful thing he had ever seen in all his eons of existence. And this was his doom, the beginning of the end of everything he had built, the first note of the song that would culminate in his own destruction. Sleep now, and dream of that moment of cosmic decision when love and fear wrestled in the heart of a god-king, when the weight of prophecy pressed down upon the shoulders of one who had thought himself free from the patterns of the past. Feel the terrible choice that faced him, between the natural love of a father for his child and the instinctive desire of a ruler to preserve his power, between trust in the future and terror of what that future might bring. For the next chapter of our story will bring the end of innocence and the beginning of the great war that would reshape the very foundations of heaven and earth, proving that even the most golden of ages must eventually give way to something new, something different, something that can only be born through conflict and struggle and the kind of courage that can only come from facing one's deepest fears. In the quiet depths of your dreaming mind, let yourself witness the moment when paradise began to crumble. Cronus stood in the birthing chamber, his newborn daughter cradled in his massive hands, while the weight of prophecy pressed down upon him like the entire dome of the sky. The child looked up at him with eyes that held all the innocence of new life and all the promise of futures yet to be born. Rhea watched from her bed, exhaustion forgotten in the joy of new motherhood, unaware of the terrible struggle taking place in her husband's heart. She saw only the tender picture of a father meeting his child for the first time, and her own heart overflowed with love for both of them. "What shall we name her, my lord?" she asked softly. "She is so beautiful, so perfect. Surely she deserves a name as lovely as herself." But Cronus could not speak. The prophecy thundered in his ears. "One of your children shall overthrow you." He looked down at the tiny being in his arms, so helpless now, so dependent upon his protection and love, and tried to see in her the seeds of rebellion and patricide. It seemed impossible, yet the words of Gaia had never proven false. In that moment of cosmic hesitation, the child reached up with one perfect little hand and grasped her father's finger. Her grip was surprisingly strong for one so new to the world, and her touch sent a shock of pure love through Cronus's divine essence. For an instant, he wavered on the edge of a different choice, a path that might have led to trust instead of fear, to collaboration instead of conflict. But the weight of kingship is a heavy burden, and those who bear it often find that love itself becomes a liability. Cronus had not overthrown his father, only to be overthrown in turn. He had not shaped the Golden Age, only to watch it be destroyed by his own offspring. The cosmos needed stability, order, continuity, and if that required him to make the hardest choice any parent could ever face, then so be it. What happened next would be remembered as one of the most shocking acts in the history of creation. With movements swift as lightning and terrible as an earthquake, Cronus lifted his daughter to his lips and swallowed her whole. The child who had been reaching for him in love and trust vanished into the darkness of his throat, still alive, still divine, but now imprisoned within her father's own body, just as he had once been imprisoned within his mother's womb. Rhea's scream of horror and anguish pierced the night like a sword through silk. She struggled to rise from her bed, reaching desperately toward her husband, but it was already too late. Their daughter, their beautiful, perfect daughter, was gone, consumed by the very one who should have protected her above all others. "What have you done?" Rhea cried, her voice breaking with grief and disbelief. "She was our child, our innocent baby. How could you? How could you?" Cronus stood frozen, the taste of betrayal bitter in his mouth, the weight of his daughter's divine essence settling uncomfortably in his belly. He had thought the deed would bring him relief, would quiet the voices of prophecy that tormented him. Instead, he felt only a hollow emptiness that seemed to echo through his very soul. "I had no choice," he whispered, the words sounding false even to his own ears. "The prophecy, she would have destroyed everything we've built." But Rhea was beyond listening to explanations or justifications. The loving partner who had stood beside him through the golden age was gone, replaced by a mother whose child had been stolen from her by the one person she had trusted above all others. From that night forward, their marriage became a hollow shell, maintained for the sake of appearances, but drained of all the love and trust that had once made it a source of strength for both of them. The pattern, once established, proved impossible to break. When Rhea bore her second child, a son with eyes like storm clouds and a voice that rumbled like distant thunder, Cronus felt the same terrible conflict between love and fear. And when the moment came to choose, fear won again. The boy joined his sister in the dark prison of their father's stomach, his cries of confusion and terror echoing in Cronus's dreams for years to come. A third child followed, and then a fourth and a fifth. Each birth brought the same cycle of joy transformed into horror, love consumed by paranoia. Hades, the grave deep thinker, Poseidon, the earthquake maker, Demeter, the grain giver, Hera, the queen-born, all of them swallowed by their father before they could take more than a few breaths of free air. With each act of filial consumption, Cronus felt pieces of his own soul dying. The golden age continued around him, but it had lost its luster in his eyes. The golden people still lived their blessed lives, but their king moved among them like a shadow of his former self. The very act of preservation had become an act of destruction, and the cosmos itself seemed to groan under the weight of such fundamental wrongness. Rhea's grief deepened with each loss, until she became little more than a ghost haunting the halls of the palace where she had once been queen. She went through the motions of royal duty, but her heart was buried with her children in the darkness of her husband's belly. The woman who had once been the nurturing mother goddess of all creation could barely bring herself to tend a single flower or comfort a single worried supplicant. But when she found herself pregnant for the 6th time, something fundamental changed in Rhea's spirit. Perhaps it was the whispered encouragement of Gaia, who visited her in dreams and visions. Perhaps it was simply the desperate love of a mother who had already lost too much. Whatever the source of her new determination, Rhea knew that this child would not suffer the same fate as the others. As her pregnancy progressed, she began to make secret plans. She traveled in disguise to the island of Crete, far from the watchful eyes of her husband, and there she sought out a hidden cave in the depths of Mount Ida. This would be where her 6th child would be born, not in the royal palace where Cronus could immediately claim him, but in a place of ancient power where the Earth Mother herself could provide protection. The labor came upon her in the depths of the night, when even the stars seemed to hold their breath in anticipation. Alone, except for the primitive spirits of the mountain, Rhea brought forth a son whose first cry shook the very foundations of creation. This was Zeus, the Stormbringer, the Sky Shaker, the one who would indeed fulfill the prophecy that had driven his father to such desperate measures. But unlike his siblings, Zeus would not be swallowed and imprisoned. Rhea wrapped him tenderly in soft blankets and gave him into the care of the mountain nymphs and the Curetes, warrior priests, who would guard him and raise him in secret. Then, with tears streaming down her face and her heart breaking anew, she took a large stone and wrapped it in swaddling clothes, making it appear to be the newborn child. When she returned to the palace and presented this decoy to Cronus, he was so consumed by his paranoid ritual that he barely looked at what he was taking from her arms. The stone disappeared down his throat just as his 5 previous children had, and Cronus felt the familiar bitter satisfaction of having once again thwarted prophecy. He did not realize that this time the real threat to his reign was growing strong and mighty in a hidden cave, nursed by goats and trained in the arts of war by ancient spirits. Years passed, and Zeus grew from a hidden infant into a powerful young god. The nymphs taught him wisdom, the Curetes taught him courage, and the mountain itself taught him the patience to wait for the right moment to reveal himself. He learned the stories of his family, how his father had overthrown Uranus, how his siblings lay imprisoned in Cronus's belly, how the Golden Age had been corrupted by fear and violence. But Zeus also learned something that his father had never understood, that true strength comes not from the suppression of potential threats, but from the cultivation of loyal allies. He made friends among the spirits of nature, earned the respect of lesser gods who had grown weary of Cronus's increasingly paranoid rule. Most importantly, he began to plan not just the overthrow of his father, but the creation of something better to take the place of the corrupted Golden Age. The moment of revelation came when Zeus had reached his full divine maturity, his powers fully developed, and his understanding of his destiny complete. Disguising himself as a simple cupbearer, using his mastery of illusion to appear as nothing more than a harmless servant, he presented himself at his father's court during one of the great festivals that still marked the passage of time in the increasingly hollow Golden Age. In his hands he carried a cup filled with wine that contained a powerful emetic provided by the wise Titaness Metis, whose gift for strategy and cunning would prove crucial to the success of the rebellion that was about to begin. The substance was not poison, for Zeus, despite everything his father had done, still hoped to resolve their conflict without unnecessary death, but a divine drug that would force Cronus to disgorge everything he had consumed in his years of paranoid filial cannibalism. Cronus, who had grown suspicious of everyone and everything in his paranoid isolation, who saw potential threats in every shadow and heard whispered conspiracies in every conversation, nevertheless could not resist the sweet wine that reminded him of happier times, of the early years of his reign when the world had seemed full of promise and the future had held nothing but hope. Perhaps it was nostalgia that lowered his guard, or perhaps it was simply the desperate hunger of a soul that had been starved of genuine pleasure for too long. Whatever the reason, he drained the cup in a single gulp, tasting in it not just wine, but all the joys he had sacrificed in his quest for security, all the love he had poisoned with fear, all the happiness he had traded for the illusion of control. The effect was immediate and dramatic, more powerful than even Zeus had anticipated. Cronus doubled over in divine agony as the emetic took hold, his body convulsing with spasms that shook the very foundations of his palace and sent shock waves rippling through the fabric of space and time itself. He began to vomit up everything he had consumed in his years of paranoid tyranny. But this was not the simple regurgitation that mortals might experience. This was a cosmic reversal, a fundamental undoing of the crimes he had committed against the natural order. First came the stone that had been substituted for Zeus, clattering across the marble floor with a sound like thunder, its surface still bearing the faint impressions of swaddling clothes and the lingering warmth of a mother's desperate deception. Then came Hera, emerging from her father's throat like a goddess reborn, her dignity intact despite her long imprisonment, her eyes blazing with the accumulated wisdom of years spent in darkness, but her spirit unbroken by the experience. Demeter followed, bringing with her the scent of growing grain and the promise of harvests yet to come. Her power over fertility and growth stronger than ever after being compressed and concentrated through years of enforced containment. Poseidon burst forth like a tidal wave made manifest, his power over the seas and earthquakes magnified by his long captivity until the very ground trembled beneath his feet and the air itself seemed to vibrate with the sound of crashing waves. Hades emerged with the quiet dignity of one who had learned to find strength in darkness, his understanding of hidden things and secret ways deepened by his experience in the ultimate prison, his compassion for the trapped and hopeless greater than it ever could have been if he had grown up in freedom and light. And finally came the firstborn daughter, whose name had never been spoken aloud, but who would be known to future generations as Hestia, goddess of the hearth and home, her gentle nature unchanged by her ordeal, but her determination to protect the innocent strengthened beyond measure. One by one, Zeus's siblings emerged from their father's stomach, fully grown and blazing with the accumulated power of their years of divine imprisonment, their abilities not diminished by their captivity, but concentrated and refined like metals purified in the hottest flames. They stood in the wreckage of their father's throne room, these 6 gods who had been denied their birthright for so long, and for a moment there was silence as they looked upon each other and upon the world they had been kept from experiencing. Then Zeus stepped forward from his disguise, revealing himself in his true form for the first time in his father's presence, and the air itself seemed to crackle with electricity as storm clouds began to gather overhead. The confrontation that followed was everything that Cronus had feared and more, but it was also something he had never anticipated in his paranoid imaginings. This was not a simple act of patricide like his own rebellion against Uranus, driven by anger and the desire for personal power. This was something far more complex and morally justified. The opening of a war that would involve every divine being in the cosmos. A conflict that would determine not just who ruled but how rule should be exercised, not just who held power, but how that power should be used for the benefit of all conscious beings. The newly freed gods of the younger generation gathered around Zeus not because he had forced them to follow him, but because they recognized in him the qualities of leadership that their father had lost: the ability to inspire rather than intimidate, to unite rather than divide, to create rather than merely preserve. They had spent their imprisonment not in bitter isolation, but in communion with each other, sharing their thoughts and dreams and visions of what the cosmos could become if it were ruled with wisdom and compassion rather than fear and paranoia. This was the Titanomachy, the War of the Titans, a conflict so vast and terrible that it would reshape not just the divine order, but the very structure of reality itself, transforming the cosmos from a place where power was concentrated in the hands of a few into a more complex system where authority was distributed among many according to their abilities and inclinations. For 10 years the battle raged across heaven and earth, with mountains hurled like stones and oceans boiled away by divine fire, with the very fabric of space and time stretched to its limits by forces that had never before been unleashed in such magnitude. The mortal world was devastated by the conflict, caught between forces they could neither understand nor escape, their carefully ordered existence disrupted by battles between beings whose power exceeded their comprehension. The Golden People, those perfect mortals who had lived their blessed lives in harmony with the divine order, found themselves refugees in their own world, fleeing from battlefields that shifted across continents and seeking shelter in caves and forests that offered little protection from the cosmic forces at war above their heads. Many of them did not survive the conflict, and those who did were forever changed by the experience, their innocence lost, and their faith in divine benevolence shaken by witnessing the destructive potential of godly anger. But Zeus had learned the crucial lesson that had escaped both his father and his grandfather, the understanding that would prove to be the key to his victory and the foundation of his future rule. He understood that lasting victory comes not through the suppression of powerful allies, but through their liberation and inclusion in a broader coalition based on mutual respect and shared goals. His first act of leadership, even as the war raged around them, was to descend into the depths of Tartarus and free the Cyclopes and Hecatoncheires whom Cronus had kept imprisoned there, out of the same paranoid fears that had led him to devour his own children. The journey to Tartarus was perilous beyond imagination, requiring Zeus to navigate through regions of existence that had been sealed off from the rest of creation for millennia. He had to pass through layers of reality that became progressively more hostile and alien, past guardians that had been set to prevent exactly this kind of rescue mission, through barriers that had been designed to be impregnable, even to divine power. But his determination was stronger than any obstacle, his sense of justice more powerful than any lock or chain, and eventually he stood before the ancient prisoners in their cosmic dungeon. The Cyclopes and Hecatoncheires had not been broken by their long imprisonment. Indeed, their time in Tartarus had only increased their strength and their understanding of the fundamental forces that govern existence. They had used their captivity to forge new kinds of weapons and develop new strategies for cosmic warfare, preparing for the day when they would once again be called upon to serve the cause of justice against tyranny. When Zeus freed them from their chains, they pledged themselves to his cause, not out of gratitude alone, but out of recognition that he represented a new kind of divine leadership, one that valued their contributions rather than fearing their power. In gratitude for their freedom and in recognition of the justice of his cause, these mighty beings became Zeus's most powerful supporters in the war that would reshape the cosmos. The Cyclopes, with their mastery of divine metallurgy and their understanding of the hidden properties of matter and energy, forged weapons of incredible power for the new gods. Thunderbolts for Zeus that could shatter mountains and humble titans, crackling with electrical energy that seemed to contain the concentrated power of entire storms. For Poseidon they created a trident that could split the sea itself and cause earthquakes that would reshape continents, a weapon that channeled the raw power of the earth's molten core. And for Hades they forged a helmet of invisibility that would allow him to move unseen through any realm, even the realm of the living, a device that bent light and perception around its wearer until they became as undetectable as shadows at midnight. The Hecatoncheires used their 100 hands and their overwhelming strength to hurl boulders the size of mountains at the Titan forces, their coordinated assault creating a barrage so intense that even beings of divine power found it impossible to withstand. Each of their 50 heads could think independently while remaining coordinated with the others, allowing them to conduct complex military operations that would have required entire armies of lesser beings. Their very presence on the battlefield was enough to tip the scales of conflict, for they represented a kind of raw power that even the mighty Titans had never fully understood or learned to counter. The final battle took place on the plains of Thessaly, where the forces of the old order and the new met in a collision that sent shockwaves through every dimension of existence, a conflict so intense that its echoes would be felt throughout all future ages. The very landscape was transformed by the battle, mountains leveled and new ones raised, rivers diverted from their ancient courses, and the sky itself scarred by the passage of divine weapons and the clash of cosmic powers. It was here that Cronus himself finally faced his son Zeus in single combat, the scythe that had won him his throne clashing against the thunderbolt that would establish the new age. Father and son locked in a battle that would determine the future of all creation. For a time it seemed that the battle might go on forever, for both combatants were beings of immense power, and neither was willing to yield to the other. Cronus fought with the desperate fury of one who knew that defeat meant not just the loss of power, but the complete destruction of everything he had built and believed in. Zeus fought with the righteous anger of one who had seen too much suffering caused by the abuse of power, too many innocents harmed by the paranoid policies of a ruler who had forgotten the difference between protection and oppression. But Zeus had something that Cronus lacked, something that made all the difference in determining the outcome of their cosmic duel. He had the certainty that comes from fighting not just for personal survival, but for the liberation of others, for the establishment of a more just and equitable order that would benefit all conscious beings rather than serving the interests of a single paranoid tyrant. His brothers and sisters fought beside him not out of fear or obligation, but out of love and shared purpose, their unity of vision giving them a strength that individual power alone could never provide. His allies had chosen to support him not because they had been forced to, but because they believed in the better world he promised to create, because they trusted in his ability to wield power wisely and justly. When Cronus finally fell, struck down by a thunderbolt that split the sky itself and lit up the heavens with its brilliance, the golden age died with him, but not in vain, for its death gave birth to something that would prove even more magnificent. The new age that was born from the ashes of the old would be called the Age of the Olympian gods, a time when divine power would be shared among many rather than hoarded by one, when the cosmos would be governed by a council of equals rather than the will of a single, increasingly paranoid ruler. The defeated Titans were not destroyed, for Zeus had learned the lesson of mercy that his predecessors had missed, understanding that the cycle of vengeance could only be broken through forgiveness and the willingness to find new roles for former enemies. Most were imprisoned in Tartarus, but with the understanding that their exile was not permanent, that they might one day earn their freedom through demonstration of their willingness to work within the new order rather than against it. Some, like Oceanus, who had remained neutral in the war, recognizing that the old order had become corrupted beyond redemption, were allowed to keep their positions and continue their cosmic functions under the new dispensation. Others, like Prometheus, who had sided with Zeus from the beginning, understanding that change was necessary even if it was painful, were honored and elevated to positions of greater responsibility and trust. As for Cronus himself, His fate was not the violent death that might have been expected given the precedent he had set in his own rebellion against his father. Instead, Zeus chose a punishment that was both just and merciful, one that would allow his father to find redemption through service rather than simply suffering through eternal torment. Cronus was eventually sent to rule over the Isles of the Blessed, those distant realms where the souls of heroes would spend their eternal rest, where those who had lived lives of courage and virtue would find the peace and happiness that had eluded them in their mortal existence. In this way, the king who had feared change and tried to prevent it through violence found a different kind of immortality, not as the eternal ruler he had tried to be, but as the guardian of those who had earned their peace through courage and virtue, as a shepherd of souls rather than a tyrant of the living. The cosmos had been reborn once again, transformed by war and revolution into something greater than it had been before, more complex and more beautiful than either the primordial simplicity of the first age or the golden harmony of the second. The age of the Titans was over, but their legacy lived on in the ordered structure of creation they had established, in the lessons their rise and fall had taught about the nature of power and responsibility, and in the eternal reminder that even the greatest powers must eventually yield to change, that even the most beautiful golden ages must give way to new possibilities, that the wheel of time turns for gods as well as mortals. And so ends our tale of the Titans and the birth of the gods, dear dreamer, this ancient story of how the cosmos grew from simple unity to complex harmony through struggle and sacrifice, through the courage of those who were willing to challenge injustice even when it wore the mask of benevolent authority. Let your mind rest now in the knowledge that even the greatest powers must eventually yield to change, that even the most beautiful golden ages must give way to new possibilities, that the universe itself is constantly being reborn through the eternal dance of creation and destruction, order and chaos, tradition and revolution. In your dreams tonight, may you walk among those ancient giants who shaped the world with their mighty hands and noble hearts. May you feel the weight of cosmic responsibility balanced by the joy of creative power. May you understand that every ending is also a beginning, every death also a birth, every fall also a rising toward something greater and more wonderful than what came before. May you carry their wisdom with you into whatever new age awaits your own awakening, and may you remember that you too are part of this eternal story, this ongoing creation that began in the void and will continue until the last star burns out and the final dream is dreamed. Sleep well and dream of gods and titans, of golden ages and cosmic revolutions, of the eternal patterns that connect all things in the great web of existence that we call the universe. Rest in the peace that comes from understanding your place in this vast and beautiful story, and wake refreshed and ready to play your own part in the continuing creation of the cosmos.